talk a little bit about rhododendrons and azaleas. And I think that you'll find that the information will be very helpful because there's only a couple of reasons why rhododendrons don't grow well on the tape. And I'll give you those answers. But to start out with, azaleas are rhododendrons, but all rhododendrons aren't azaleas. So azaleas are considered in the genus of rhododendron now. Most rhododendrons are evergreen. Azaleas, there are deciduous and evergreen azaleas. There are different characteristics that separate them, such as scales or oppressed hairs or the number of stamens. If you want to get technical, you can learn about that. I'm not going to talk about that today. Most of the large leaf rhododendrons are lepidodonts, and most of the small leaf rhododendrons are lepidodonts. And I was in the Rhododendron Society for a long time before I figured out how I could tell one from the other. The longer name is the bigger leaf. So it's a simple way of trying to figure it out. You learn a lot of these things at the Rhododendron Society. I've been a charter member since 1986 when the Cape Cod chapter was developed. Originally, there was only a Massachusetts chapter, and you had to go off Cape at night if you wanted to go to a meeting, and I never got there. You know what it's like going over the bridge. So I was really happy when they started the Cape Cod chapter, and it meets at the community college on the second Sunday of the month, September through March, and then April is usually a dinner meeting. Anyway, there are species, hybrids, and native rhododendrons. Species are plants that occur naturally in the wild, and they interbreed. They are listed by species without a capital letter. So I forgot to write on here. Okay, so you've got rhododendron will be R dot, and then like one of these is Bassii. See if I can spell it right. Anyway, so that's how it's written. So if you go and look at a label, on a plant, and you've got all this in small, starts with a small letter, that's a species. Now, a hybrid will have something like this, R, and then it'll have quotes with a capital letter. Scintillation, like that. That tells you it's a hybrid. So when you go and look on the label, this is a way of finding out. There are East Coast natives and West Coast natives. So some of the natives that are on the West Coast are not terribly great for the East Coast, and vice versa. So some of the East Coast natives are the Bassii, and which is a native azalea. We have a whole bunch of native azaleas that are in the mountains down in North Carolina, Virginia, in that area. It'd be gorgeous to visit. And then you can have a cross. Somebody can hybridize two species or native plants. Like someone took two native species, Canadense and Bassii, and he made one called Rhododendron Bassii with a small v, and then quotes white pine. So a lot of these azaleas will interbreed, and you will get from seed cross-pollinating, and you'll get different ones. And those are considered native, but if a man does it and hybridizes two, then it's a hybrid. And that's how you can tell the difference. Anyway, some of the native lepidodonts, the large ones, are Catawbiense and Maximum. Maximum is one that you see quite frequently, and it's large, like the name, Maximum, and it blooms in July. It's great for screening. And there's a hybrid of that one called Pink Butterflies that someone hybridized. So this is how you get all the differences. How do you choose a rhododendron? Most of the problem that people have is that a landscaper went and put nice little rhododendrons in front of their house, in front of their windows, and in about 10 years, they're 15 feet tall, and they don't know what to do with them. Well, rhododendrons come at 1 foot tall. It'll stay quite very small. I have one that is like that, and they'll grow to 15, 20 feet tall. So you have to know which ones you're buying. The height on a tag in the nursery, when you look at that, that's an average height at 10 years. And this is just a guide, because a lot depends on the culture and where it is, the environment it's planted on, so it's just a guide. Usually, the larger the leaf, the bigger the plant. So that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is to look at 1 year's growth. Now, you see this? This is 1 year's growth from here to here. So you've got that much. Big plant. This is 1 year's growth. Smaller plant. So if you look from this is the years before, this is the new shoot that came out. So if you look at that space in between, that gives you an idea of how big it's going to get or how much growth you're going to get. Of course, don't forget that the growers tend to push these plants for growth. So they might be a little bit bigger space than you're going to get in your garden. So you shouldn't use these real large leafed ones in front of your house. But there are a lot of smaller leafed ones. Let's see. This one and oh, this is Miss Maiden. This has got some of the best foliage you've ever wanted to find. I've got one now, and it's about this tall. But it stays compact. You can prune these, and I'll talk about pruning in a minute. But I always look to the foliage and think about that a lot more than I do the bloom. I look at the bloom, but I also look at the foliage because you've got that 12 months of the year. So you're going to want to put things with nice foliage up front where you see them all the time. The rangy big ones with big beautiful blossoms, you put them in the background. You see those blossoms and you enjoy them and they're wonderful, but after when they're not blooming, you don't have a straggly plant in your face. So it's a good idea to look at the foliage and make sure that that's really nice. Back of this is called teddy bear because this is indimentum. And when this is about finished blooming, and you're going to deadhead when this is done. You're going to take this off like that. And the new growth will come out right on the edges here. So you have to be careful when you set this off that you don't get the new growth. The sooner you take that off after it blooms, the better, because strength goes into making seed. So you don't want strength to go into making seed. And of course that looks a lot better than one that's going to have the seed heads after the flower is done. So it's neater. And well, then when the new growth comes out on these with indimentum, they have something called tomentum, which is this same fuzzy stuff on the top of the new leaves that come out. So, and like someone mentioned, and I had a client once, he said, is that a disease? No, it's not a disease. What it does, though, is it gives you almost like a second bloom because you've got this kind of look on this whole, all the new growth on there of this one on teddy bear. This is a little different color. It's more of a tan. They don't all have it. Just certain varieties have the indimentum or the tomentum. One of the things that's nice about it is it does, the insects don't like it as well. And usually they'll take a little more light. And that's another thing with the lepidodes and the leptos. The lepidodes with the small leaves will take more sun. than the large leaf ones. And if you think about it, you know, way up in the north we have a lot of needle evergreens because they can take that winter. They don't evaporate a lot of moisture because when the ground is frozen, water evaporates from the leaves. Well, if you go down in the tropics, you've got all these great big leaves. Well, they don't have to worry about frozen ground, do they? And they get water. They're in jungles, so they're able to have these really large leaves. So it works that way with all plants. So a larger leaf plant is going to suffer more from winter sun and wind. So that's important. When you plant these plants, you have to think about what spacing you give them. So the larger leaf ones, you know, you really should keep them 8, 10, 12 feet apart. And the smaller plants, you can put maybe 5 or 6 feet apart. And then plant something in between. I know when you buy the plant, it's small. And you don't want to do it. You want to put them all together. And 3 years later, you've got a mess because they're all too big. And the landscapers like to do this because they want you to be happy right after you plant them. They want you to say, oh, how beautiful it is. Well, if it's too beautiful, you're in trouble. Because in 3 years, it's going to be crowded. So the thing to do is give them enough room and plant things that you can remove easily in between, like ground covers, or which you can mostly leave, and perennials, some of the smaller grasses. The caryxes will take shade. Those are small and you can move them. So that makes more sense to be able to move the small stuff and leave the big ones. You can transplant rhododendrons. They have a very shallow, wide root system, but they're heavy when they're big. They're very heavy. I just helped a neighbor who had these huge rhododendrons that smothered her house, and we moved them up into an area along her driveway. It took 6 men to move one of them. So sometimes it's easier just to start from scratch or move them before they get to that size and realize that they can be moved very easily, and it's good to do them in March, or you can do them in early September. Actually, planting in early September is a great time to plant rhododendrons. The problem is you mostly can only buy them in the spring. So what you really need to think about too is that rhodies mix well with other plants. They mix great with hydrangeas, pyrus, orchidea, and hollies. And you know, there's a big thing with hydrangeas now. Everybody's joining the hydrangea society. Everybody's going crazy over hydrangeas. And you put a collection of hydrangeas all in one spot. What have you got in the winter? Sticks. You have sticks all winter. So I think it's a great idea to mix your rhododendrons and hydrangeas together, because the hydrangeas will bloom in partial shade, and so will the rhododendrons. They shouldn't be in dead shade, neither one of them. And but the hydrangeas wilt in full sun because they love water. So if you mix them, you really have a year-round shrub scene, because you've got, in the spring you've got the rhododendrons blooming, you've got the hydrangeas blooming in the summer, and then you've got the evergreen all winter. And the rhododendrons will tell you how cold it is when you look out the window as well. There's a couple of things that you have to understand about planting rhododendrons. As I said before, they have a wide, shallow root system. And basically, this is really good to know about all plants. You should never dig the hole deeper than the plant wall. Never. Because what happens then, first of all, the roots don't go down, they go out. So you need a wide, shallow hole, and you need not to put a whole lot of loose soil on the bottom of the hole, because when you do that, that soil will sink and pack down, and then the plant won't be planted at the right height. It'll be too low. And that's the biggest mistake you can make with rhododendrons and azaleas, is to plant them too low. The reason they need well-drained soil is because of the oxygen the roots need. Now, things that will grow in soggy soil don't need a lot of oxygen. That's why they can do that, because the oxygen diminishes as you go down in the ground. So you have to keep the rhododendrons with the crown so that water does not sit in them. If you've got here's the soil line, and you've dug the hole like this, and your crown is like this, water is going to sit in that crown in the winter because the ground's frozen, the water has no place to go. It sits in that crown and it rots it. And it's very unhappy. So what you have to do is to make sure that you plant that rhododendron with a crown so that the water goes like this off of it. And then you put your mulch around here. You don't ever put the mulch on the crown. Your root system is going to go like this. So, I don't know if you can all see this. This is what most people do. It's the wrong way to plant. You don't put a lot of soil on the bottom, and you don't make the hole just the same width as the plant. What you want to do is make a nice, wide. You're going to dig your hole wide, and you're going to loosen the soil even farther, because those roots, you want them to move quickly. You want them to go and establish that plant. So they have to have loose soil to do that. And you want that to be no deeper here. And if you're in clay, you have to plant like this, on top of it, almost on top of the ground. You have to have at least that much of your ball above ground, and then you go up like that, because a clay doesn't drain. The other thing you can do when you're planting in clay, any of you have clay? Okay, when you're planting in clay, any plants, take a pitchfork and make holes into the bottom, because when you make it to a shovel, you're like making pottery, and the water sits on it. You make holes and you throw some gypsum in the holes, because that helps the drainage. It doesn't change the pH, but it helps the drainage. So you take a pitchfork and you put that down in the bottom of the hole, throw some gypsum in, and keep your holes high and wide. Forget it. Okay, so you want to add some compost or rotted leaves in the hole with your rhododendrons. You do not want to add nitrogen. Don't ever put nitrogen in the hole. I only use organic fertilizer in my garden. And you can use some phosphate in the hole if you want. Rock phosphate is fine, or superphosphate, because phosphate doesn't go through the soil very readily. But nothing else. And then the next spring, you can fertilize with Hollytone in April. And rhododendrons and azaleas don't need a lot of fertilizer. They're not that hungry. So, and if your plant is nice and dark green and looks healthy, don't push it with fertilizer. Now, a lot of people are saying, do not put amendments into the hole. That's the latest thing out there. Do not amend your soil, because the roots are not going to want to move. They don't live on Cape Cod. If you're planting in sand, you have to have something that helps get these plants established. As long as you mix your compost, is what I use, or in with the existing soil, so there's some of both in there. It helps establish, and you do this nice wide hole, even with trees, it helps establish the plant. Eventually those roots will move out. So I think it's important to help, because we have not only sand, we have very dry summers. And this is the second thing that people do wrong with rhododendrons. If you buy them in the spring, you have to water the root ball once a week the first summer, and probably the second summer. Think about it. This is an evergreen plant. We don't get any rain. The root ball is not in your, that you're putting in, whether, especially if it's a pot and not a balled and burlap, the pots are in a medium. They're not in the soil that you have. Those plants' roots cannot absorb any of the water that's around in your ground that first summer. It has to go through a winter before those roots can absorb water from the surrounding soil. You've got an evergreen top. Even overhead irrigation isn't going to do it. You either have to have a drip on it or you have to water by hand once a week and give it a good watering into the root ball, or you're going to lose that plant. It's really important to do that. And to mulch it. But no mulch on the crown. Okay, let's see. Oh, when you're planting the plant, the best way to do it is to, get the depth, dig your hole to the depth, place the plant in it, make sure it's at the same height. Make any adjustments at the height that you need it for the surrounding soil. Then put in your soil mix halfway up, all around the plant. Tamp it down with your fingers, not your feet. None of this stuff. Because what you want those roots to move. You don't want to compact that soil. All you're doing is trying to get the soil to filter down so that there's no air pockets. So when you go halfway, fill around the hole halfway, tamp it down with your fingers, water it. That helps also getting the air pockets out. Then fill up the rest of the way, tamp it again with your fingers, water it again, and then mulch it.